My fiancé had his best friend marry me in his place, but I chose to turn that fake marriage into something real. I ended up falling in love with his best friend, and we lived together as if we were truly husband and wife. After we registered our marriage and submitted it to the state, my former fiancé completely lost his mind. In my previous life, I had given up the opportunity to join the Fireseed Project at the National Academy of Sciences just so I could marry Daniel Reed. I even broke off all contact with my parents because I was determined to marry him and no one else. But on our wedding day, Daniel chose to go pick up his true love, Clara Jiang, and asked his best friend Michael Lewis to stand in as the groom in his place. I didn't blame Daniel. I went through with the wedding as he wished, marrying Michael and returning to what should have been my bridal home, waiting for the wedding night with hope and nervous excitement. But to my shock, Daniel showed up later with Clara. He told me honestly that even though he didn't love me, he would still take responsibility for me and go through with the marriage registration. But only if I agreed to let Clara live with us. He even swore that nothing improper had ever happened between them, that they were completely innocent. For the sake of getting the marriage certificate and staying with him, I foolishly agreed to this absurd condition. After that, Clara began setting me up again and again. The meals I spent hours cooking, she would secretly drizzle honey into them, take one bite, then pretend to have an allergic reaction. Daniel would panic and rush her to the hospital, and she would accuse me of deliberately using honey despite knowing she was allergic. She even poured mineral water into her own cosmetics, then acted pitiful in front of Daniel, saying she didn't blame me because she was just a guest in our home, and it was only fair she suffered a little inconvenience. Once, she planted a diamond necklace, one Daniel had given her long ago, in my drawer and accused me of stealing it. Later, she replaced my daily vitamins with birth control pills. Luckily, I discovered it before her plan succeeded. Because of Clara's constant manipulation, Daniel's attitude toward me grew colder and harsher. I could see disgust and impatience in his eyes every time he looked at me. Yet, even then, I never blamed him. I thought my love alone would be enough. When I found out I was pregnant, I was overjoyed. I thought it was finally good news, something that could bring us back together. But Daniel just gave me a faint, indifferent "oh," and said nothing more. Clara, on the other hand, was visibly shocked. She had thought that by switching my vitamins, there was no chance I could conceive. She had been waiting for Daniel to completely despise me so she could replace me. She had no idea that I had already discovered her tricks. I believed that with this baby, Daniel would finally come back to me and that we could live happily together. But when I was 9 months pregnant and went into labor, Daniel abandoned me to take Clara, who only had a slight fever of 101 Fahrenheit, to the hospital. I was in excruciating pain, begging him to think of the baby and take me to the hospital too. Clara coldly said that it was impossible for me to give birth yet because my due date hadn't arrived, that I was just nervous and imagining things. In the end, Daniel, completely convinced by her, left me behind and took Clara to the hospital. Because I wasn't taken to the hospital in time, both my baby and I died. As my life slipped away, I saw Michael Lewis rushing into the hospital. He held me in his arms, crying, confessing the love he had hidden for so long. Only then did I realize there had always been someone who truly loved me. I just never noticed. I died with endless regret in my heart. Then, in the haze of fading light, I opened my eyes again and saw myself standing in front of a mirror, wearing a white wedding dress. I had been reborn. I was back on my wedding day. That meant I could see Michael again. At that thought, tears filled my eyes. In my previous life, he had given up his own chance to join the Fireseed Project just to protect me. He had stayed quietly by my side, loving me silently, even though I never once turned to look at him. Thinking of that, my heart began to tremble. In my heart, I silently swore to myself, "Michael Lewis, this time, I won't let you slip away again." As the background music grew more passionate, I slowly walked in, dragging the hem of my white wedding dress. When I reached the groom's side, I blushed and waited for him to turn around. Just like in my previous life, the groom wasn't my fiancé, but his best friend. My childhood companion, Michael Lewis. With tears shimmering in my eyes, I teased him softly. Why is it you? Do you really want to be my groom that badly? There was no shock in my voice this time, only the joy of seeing him again after so long. He immediately reached out to support my arm, his eyes filled with concern and gentle warmth. Leaning close to my ear, he whispered, Daniel called me this morning. He said Clara has returned from abroad, and he went to pick her up. So, he asked me to stand in for him and walk you through the ceremony. In my past life, when I heard Michael say those words, my mind went completely blank. Even though I had long known that Daniel never loved me, that my feelings for him were nothing more than one-sided wishful thinking, I also knew how deeply he cared for Clara. His love for her was like an unshakable fortress I could never break through. Still, I never imagined that he would go so far as to give away the wedding I had painstakingly prepared, just for her. Yet even then I shamelessly clung to him, still hoping against all reason that one day he would turn back and choose me. Now that I think about it, how laughable and pathetic that was. At that moment, a wave of commotion rippled through the guests below the stage. People began whispering to each other. What's going on? The groom changed? Where's Daniel? Don't tell me he's playing some cruel joke on Lisa again. This is going too far. I bet he ran away. It must have something to do with that Clara woman. Poor Lisa, such a good girl, and she's still blinded by that man. Did you notice? Not even Daniel's parents are here. What kind of attitude is that for a wedding? Among the guests, some of Daniel's groomsmen and a few of his friends were whispering to each other as well. Hearing all those murmurs, my tears fell uncontrollably. I didn't even know whether I was crying for the years of love I had wasted on Daniel, or for the man standing across from me now, Michael, who was enduring this humiliation with me. Suddenly, Michael took the microphone from the MC and knelt down before me. His voice was solemn, yet full of deep sincerity, as he said, Lisa, my name is Michael Lewis. I'm the boy you've known since childhood. The one who's always been quietly supporting you from behind. I'm your classmate of 10 years, the one who knows you better than anyone else. I've loved you deeply but never dared to say it. I've loved you to my very bones but never showed it. Only because your heart was always with Daniel, and you never once looked my way. But this time, I'm not just standing here in his place to marry you. I want to protect you with my whole heart for the rest of my life. I want to make you my real bride. If you're willing to marry me, I'll spend my life guarding you, loving you, cherishing you. Lisa, will you marry me? Michael's confession left me utterly stunned. In my previous life, he never said these words. Back then, he had only gone through the wedding ceremony to save my dignity. Michael and I had known each other since childhood. Our parents were both researchers at the National Academy of Sciences. We grew up side by side, sharing a deep, innocent friendship. But I had never once thought of him romantically. My heart had always belonged to Daniel Reed, and I gave everything I had to him without hesitation. Yet Daniel only ever loved the woman he saw as his white moonlight, Clara. I still remember when Clara was kidnapped. Daniel went alone to rescue her, taking multiple stab wounds in the process, but refusing to back down until she was safe. He nearly lost his life saving her. Afterward, I stayed by his hospital bed day and night, caring for him while Clara, once rescued, left the country without even looking back. Daniel could have been promoted when he returned to the army, but because he had acted on his own and gotten injured, he lost that opportunity completely. I took care of Daniel for 4 months, staying by his side until he was completely out of danger. When he finally recovered and saw things clearly, he chose to give up on Clara and marry me instead. We never had a proposal, no engagement photos, and he didn't even go with me to pick out my wedding dress. But as long as he was willing to marry me, none of that mattered. I would have accepted anything. I just never imagined that our wedding would end up like this. But fortunately, we hadn't registered our marriage yet, which meant I still had a chance to choose again. Thinking of that, I looked back at the man standing before me. His eyes were full of emotion, his face calm yet deeply moved. Michael Lewis, the boy I had known since childhood. We had entered the youth program at the National Academy of Sciences together when we were 16. In terms of professional skill, he was exceptionally gifted. In character and background, he came from a family of scholars, cultured, kind, and steadfast. As memories of our past flashed before my eyes, I suddenly realized just how good this man truly was. My heart softened, and I said with tears glistening in my eyes, "Michael Lewis, I'm willing. I'm willing to marry you." The entire wedding hall fell silent. All the guests stared in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. But when I turned to look at my parents, I saw relief and quiet joy in their expressions. They had always hoped that one day I would marry Michael. From the beginning, they had seen him as their ideal son-in-law. But back then, I was too stubborn and blind, chasing after Daniel without caring about how my parents felt. In this life, I swore I would never again make them worry or break their hearts. Suddenly, Michael's parents arrived at the venue, slightly out of breath but beaming with joy. They hurried to the stage, accepted the ceremonial corsages of honored father and honored mother from the MC, and proudly pinned them to their chests. "We came as soon as we heard the news," Mr. Lewis said, his voice brimming with excitement. "Today, the Lewis family is welcoming our daughter-in-law. We couldn't be happier. Lisa has long been the daughter-in-law we've always hoped for. I apologize for how sudden this change is, but please everyone, let's continue the ceremony as planned." With his announcement, the ceremony smoothly resumed. This time, my heart had already made its choice. My groom was no longer Daniel Reed, but the man standing before me, Michael Lewis. As for Daniel, his parents had always looked down on me, believing I wasn't good enough for their son. They never respected me, not even enough to attend this wedding. None of Daniel's relatives were invited either. And that was fine. The fewer outsiders, the better. At least no one could interfere with my marriage to Michael. The ceremony went on without a hitch. During the toast, Michael's mother removed a family heirloom bracelet from her wrist and placed it on mine. Her eyes filled with tears as she smiled and said, "Welcome to the family." After the ceremony, I pulled Michael by the hand and said, "Let's go get our marriage certificate right now." Our parents had been waiting for this moment for years. Once everything was done, I packed up all of my belongings, left Daniel completely, and moved into my new home with Michael. Daniel never appeared, not even to offer an explanation. I deleted every way he could contact me and erased him from my life. That evening, as we were having dinner with Michael's parents, their expressions suddenly turned serious. "Lisa," Mr. Lewis said solemnly, "you know that your parents and we are all researchers at the National Academy of Sciences. In our hearts, the interests of our country always come first. We've dedicated our lives to it, and we have no regrets. Our lives belong to the nation." He paused, then continued, "You remember the Fireseed project we've talked to you about before. It's now recruiting new members for the research team. You and Michael were both top students in the youth program. This time, the country has entrusted us with an important mission. We hope the two of you will carry on our legacy and continue to serve the nation." He looked at me kindly but firmly. "Back then, when we invited you, your heart was completely tied to Daniel, and you refused without hesitation. But now, since you and Michael are married, then I hope you'll think about it carefully," Mr. Lewis said. "Yes," I replied softly. "I really do need to think about it carefully." Before, I had spent 3 long months preparing for my wedding with Daniel Reed, only to realize later that in his eyes it had meant absolutely nothing. I looked at my parents and at Michael, then said firmly, "Dad, Mom, Michael, I've decided. I want to join the Fireseed project." When Michael heard that, his whole expression lit up with excitement. In my previous life, he had given up his own chance to participate in the Fireseed project just to stay by my side and take care of me. In this life, I wanted both of us to live without regrets. "What good kids," Mr. Lewis said emotionally. "Seeing the two of you married has finally lifted the weight off our hearts." "There's less than a month before the Fireseed project officially begins," he continued. "You'll both need to take care of your personal affairs before then. Once you've signed the confidentiality agreement and joined the classified research unit, you won't be able to contact the outside world anymore." Mrs. Lewis nodded seriously and added gently, "Make sure you handle everything properly, both of you. After you enter, your lives won't be the same." "Got it, Mom, Dad," Michael said with a reassuring smile. "Lisa and I understand. We'll take care of it." He squeezed my hand tightly, and I smiled back at him with warmth in my eyes. Just as we were about to continue dinner, an ill-timed ringtone suddenly broke the moment. Michael picked up his phone and frowned when he saw the name on the screen. Daniel Reed. He hesitated briefly, then grabbed my hand and led me into the bedroom before answering. "Hey man, sorry to bother you today." Daniel's familiar voice came through the speaker, lazy and casual. "I've got some stuff to take care of for Clara. Can you handle Lisa for me a little longer?" Michael's voice turned cold. "Aren't you worried about her finding out?" Daniel chuckled. "Worried about what? Just buy her a bouquet in a few days. She'll come running back like always. Besides, Clara doesn't have anyone here. Who else can help her if not me?" "And Lisa?" Michael asked sharply. "If you're really my friend, don't question me. Just deal with it for me, all right?" Daniel replied impatiently, and before Michael could say another word, the call was cut off. Every word from Daniel's mouth struck me like a slap. Hearing his tone, his arrogance, his carelessness, I was shaken to my core. How could I have been so blind in my past life? How could I have wasted all my love on a man so selfish, so irresponsible, so unfaithful? I turned to Michael with a faint smile of relief. "You can block his number now, too." Michael gave a short laugh. "That goes without saying. I've had enough of that jerk. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have even bothered answering him." With that, he deleted Daniel's contact information and blocked every way he could reach him. I felt an incredible lightness in my chest, as if the last thread tying me to my past life had finally been cut. "All right," Michael said, his tone softening as he wrapped an arm around me. "Let's plan out this next month. It might just be the longest vacation we'll ever get." I looked up at him, smiling. "Then let's take a honeymoon." His lips curved into a tender grin. "All right, I'll take you to see the Northern Lights. I know that's always been your dream." He reached out and gently brushed my hair back, his touch warm and affectionate. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. "Seeing the Northern Lights has always been my dream." In my past life, no matter how many times I begged Daniel, he never once took me. A few days later, Michael and I arrived in the fjords of Norway. The cold night air shimmered with countless stars. And then, before my eyes, a ribbon of emerald green light unfurled across the sky, the aurora. It shifted and flowed like waves, blending with shades of pink and violet, painting the snow-capped mountains and icy rivers with otherworldly beauty. "Lisa," Michael said softly, his voice tinged with nostalgia, "do you remember that night in our freshman year when we released fireflies in the lab?" "Of course I remember," I said with a smile. A lot of our classmates had never seen them before. It was beautiful, just like the Northern Lights we're seeing now. I leaned against Michael's shoulder, watching the sky shimmer above us, and as the aurora reached its brightest, my heart overflowed with warmth and peace, a feeling I had never known before. We exchanged rings beneath the sky, and the Northern Lights flowed above us like a galaxy witnessing our eternal love. In that moment, I finally understood how beautiful love could truly be. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my best friend, Fang Fang. "Lisa, guess what? Daniel called me today. He said he couldn't reach you, told me to tell you to stop being so stubborn. He said if you keep acting like this, you'll never see him again." "Seriously, he actually told me to tell you that." I couldn't help but laugh as I read her message. Fang Fang never held back when she talked about him. "That guy must have lost his mind," she typed again. "He's been acting like some big shot for so long he actually thinks he's someone important. He should take a good look at himself and figure out who he really is." I burst out laughing. The man I once kept at the very center of my heart was now being mocked so effortlessly, and I didn't even feel angry, just amused. He was so childish. Did he actually think my silence meant I was mad and giving him the silent treatment? I typed back between giggles, "Right? I've never met anyone so full of himself. I honestly don't even know what to say anymore." Fang Fang replied almost instantly, "Forget him. Anyway, how are things between you and Michael?" "We're great," I wrote back. "For the first time, I actually understand what love feels like." "That's such a relief," she said. "I'm so glad Michael's there for you. Otherwise, I'd be really worried." Fang Fang was my closest friend, and the person Daniel always contacted whenever he couldn't find me. She absolutely despised him now. By the way, she continued, I heard Daniel's precious white moonlight, Clara, went to a private hospital to get an abortion. Then she told Daniel it was appendicitis and that she'd had surgery, and guess what? He actually believed her. He's been sitting in the hospital with her day and night. I frowned. Really? Yeah, she replied quickly. When Clara went abroad, it was because of some guy she was seeing. Then that guy dumped her, and when she found out she was pregnant, she ran back home. And now Daniel's playing the perfect fool, taking care of another man's mess like some lovesick idiot. I sighed, shaking my head. So explosive, I texted back. Honestly, Daniel doesn't seem very smart these days. Fang Fang replied with a laugh emoji. He's completely lost it. His so-called bros even tried to tell him what's going on, but he thinks they're trying to break him and Clara apart. He's still convinced she's his one true love. They're all so fed up with him that most of them don't even talk to him anymore. She paused before sending one more message. Oh, and he still has no idea what really happened on your wedding day. Either he doesn't care enough to find out, or he's too busy pretending everything's fine. Let him be, I replied. He chose his own path. Whatever comes of it, that's his burden to bear. After chatting with Fang Fang, I felt completely at ease. Clara had become the perfect mirror of karma for him. The more she trampled on his devotion, the more vindicated I felt. Michael and I spent the next 2 weeks traveling together. We went everywhere, across mountains and rivers, climbed snowy peaks, watched the aurora again, and shared every sunrise and sunset. With each day, our hearts opened more, our bond growing deeper and more passionate. I often caught myself regretting how I had failed him in my past life. But in this one, I was grateful, because we were finally together, and this time, nothing and no one could tear us apart. When we returned home, there were only 5 days left before the Fireseed project began. I met up with Fang Fang again, and we spent the evening drinking and talking late into the night. Neither of us knew when we'd see each other again. Maybe in 3 years, maybe 5, or maybe never. She looked at me with glassy eyes and said softly, You know, a few days ago. Fang Fang took another sip of her drink, her cheeks flushed from laughter. You know what happened a few days ago? She said. Daniel actually showed up at my place, saying I must have been hiding you. He said you've thrown your tantrum long enough, had enough time to cool off, and that your anger should have passed by now. Then he told me he's giving you 5 days. If you don't contact him first within those 5 days, he won't register the marriage with you. Fang Fang burst out laughing, unable to hold it in. He's unbelievable. He doesn't even know what's going on, yet he still thinks you'll come crawling back. What a clueless idiot. She kept ranting about him while I listened, smiling quietly. 5 days. That would be exactly when Michael and I were scheduled to leave for the Fireseed project base. Perfect. At least by then, I wouldn't have to worry about Daniel trying to contact me again. Let's not ruin the mood talking about him, I said, lifting my glass with a grin. Come on. Let's toast to new beginnings. And just like that, our laughter echoed late into the night. Our longest vacation eventually came to an end. When the day arrived, Michael and I boarded the transport vehicle arranged by our unit. During the ride, he suddenly reached into his backpack and pulled out a small silver fox ornament. Nestled inside was a single lily bloom. Lily, it's my favorite flower, he said softly. I turned to him in surprise. You remembered that? I hadn't expected him to know me so well. He just smiled, saying nothing, only watching me with that warm, steady gaze that always made me feel safe. In the days that followed, we both devoted ourselves completely to our research, pouring all our energy and passion into the Fireseed project. Meanwhile, in another part of the world, from the day we left, Daniel seemed to lose his mind. He searched for me everywhere. Maybe he had truly believed I would never leave him, that no matter how he treated me, I would always stay. So when I vanished, his obsession turned into madness. But it was too late. He would never find me again. The next time I saw Daniel Reed was 20 years later. Michael and I had been invited to attend an international scientific forum. Daniel was there too, as a senior military officer assigned to oversee our security detail. When I saw him again, time had clearly left its mark. His once youthful confidence had faded into something heavier, more weathered, a mix of restraint and regret. Our line of work often brought danger. There were countless eyes watching us, waiting for a chance to seize the classified documents we carried. Because of that, the government had arranged an extensive protection team for this trip. But even with every precaution, something still went wrong. On the way back, just as we were getting into the car, a sniper's bullet whistled through the air. I happened to be leaning down at that moment. The bullet grazed my right shoulder, missing anything vital. Before I could react, Daniel threw himself over me, shielding my body with his. He was hit twice, but he still managed to push me inside and slam the car door shut. Panic rippled through the team as the sound of gunfire echoed in the distance. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the blood spreading across Daniel's uniform. I rushed forward, trying to hold him up, my hands trembling. Michael immediately grabbed the emergency kit and began treating his wounds with practiced precision. Thankfully, one of the security medics was with us. After a few tense minutes, they managed to stop the bleeding. Daniel's breathing steadied, but even as his strength faded, he kept gripping my hand tightly, refusing to let go. Michael wanted to pull me away but hesitated. He knew that after 20 years this might be the last time Daniel and I would ever speak, so he stayed silent. "Lisa, Lisa," Daniel gasped weakly, his voice rough from pain. "I finally found you." His eyes were wet, his expression a mix of relief and anguish. "I've been searching for you like a madman for 20 years, but there was never a trace of you anywhere. Only after you disappeared did I realize. You were the one thing I could never live without. Without you, my life has been empty. I've been living worse than dead." "I tried everything," he continued, his voice trembling. "Every contact, every favor, every resource I had, but all your information was sealed. I couldn't find you no matter what I did. That's when I knew you must have joined a top-secret national unit." He paused, struggling to breathe. "Lisa, there was never anything between me and Clara. Not really. It was my fault. I took your love for granted. I trampled on your heart as if it meant nothing, and I thought you'd never leave. But when you were gone, I realized I didn't even know what university you went to. I didn't even know what kind of food you liked," Daniel said weakly, his eyes clouded with guilt. "I didn't know what flowers you loved, or even where you lived. It wasn't until you were gone that I realized I'd never truly cared about you at all. I always thought you were just angry with me, upset that I didn't show up to the wedding. I never imagined you'd already made up your mind to leave me for good. Lisa, in this life, I really wronged you." As he spoke, Daniel's body began trembling violently, his voice breaking between gasps. Thankfully, by then, we had already reached the military hospital. It was the safest place we could be. After an emergency surgery and hours of treatment, he finally made it through the danger. Michael and I took turns staying by his bedside over the next few days. 2 days later, Daniel finally woke up. When Michael sent me a message telling me that Daniel had regained consciousness, I immediately went to the ward. But as I reached the doorway, I heard the two of them talking inside. "Michael," Daniel said, his voice hoarse, "I had a dream. I dreamed that on our wedding day, you didn't propose to her. I dreamed that she forgave me in the end, that we got married, that we had a child together, but when she was about to give birth, I left her. Because of me, she and the baby both died. The dream felt so real. It was like it just happened." Tears streamed down Daniel's cheeks as he spoke. Michael's voice was calm when he asked, "And Clara? What happened to the two of you after that?" Daniel's lips twisted bitterly. She was a liar. I didn't find out until later. Back then, after I finished my military training, she told me she was going to study abroad in the US. But when I was about to marry Lisa, she suddenly said she couldn't let go of me and wanted to come back. Even though I was already engaged, she returned anyway. In those first few days after she came back, she did everything she could to seduce me. I thought she'd truly come back for love, that she'd changed. I never realized she was scheming all along." He shook his head and continued, his tone full of self-loathing. "But because I'd already promised to marry Lisa, I rejected her. I ignored all her advances. Her plan didn't work. Later, I was planning to find Lisa and explain everything clearly when Clara suddenly called me, saying she was in the hospital after an appendectomy and had no one else to turn to. I was afraid something might happen to her, so I stayed to take care of her for 2 weeks. It wasn't until much later that I found out the truth. She had gone abroad for another man. When she got pregnant, that man abandoned her. She thought she could come back and trick me into sleeping with her, then use the pregnancy to force me to marry her, making me the father of her child. He gave a bitter laugh, but every time she tried, I turned her down. When she realized her pregnancy was becoming obvious, she went and had an abortion, then lied to me, saying it was appendicitis. Daniel let out a long sigh, shaking his head in regret. In the end, I brought this all on myself. I had someone as good as Lisa, yet I let a venomous woman like Clara make a fool out of me. Then he looked at Michael. How about you and Lisa? Do you have children? Michael nodded. We have a son. He's 14 now. My parents take care of him most of the time since we're always working. We don't see him as often as we'd like. That's good, Daniel said faintly. Then, after a pause, his voice hardened slightly. You know, when I finally found out what happened on our wedding day, I couldn't believe it. After all those years of being close like brothers, you, of all people, ended up taking her from me. I thought you'd betrayed me. It wasn't until I realized that all your records, both of you, had been completely sealed, that I understood. You were truly gone. You really took Lisa away from me. There was bitterness in his tone, almost a plea beneath the anger. Michael's gaze remained calm. Daniel, do you want to hear the truth? Daniel frowned. Of course. Don't tell me you've still been hiding something from me. All right, Michael said quietly. Then I'll tell you everything. That dream you had while you were unconscious, it wasn't just a dream. It was Lisa's real experience from her previous life. You don't remember it, but I do. Back then, before I ever had the chance to confess to her, she had already fallen for you. She cared for you in every way possible. And I saw it all. I stayed close to you, calling you my brother just to remain by her side. Michael's voice deepened as he went on. But you were completely blinded by Clara. You never saw what Lisa felt for you. Not once. Do you remember your 18th birthday that summer? He paused, looking Daniel directly in the eyes. That summer, Lisa secretly worked at a bakery as an apprentice, just so she could make you a cake with her own hands. He spent half a month at that bakery, practicing until he finally mastered it. He wanted everything to be perfect before making a heart-shaped cake just for you. Later, he even booked a restaurant and invited all of us, his friends, to help him set up a surprise birthday celebration for you in advance. But you never showed up. Because Clara accidentally cut her finger that day, you chose to stay with her instead. Lisa waited for you in that restaurant for 10 long hours. In the end, she sat there crying, eating the cake she had made for you by herself. Do you have any idea how much I hated you in that moment? Our time studying at the National Academy of Sciences was incredibly valuable, yet she spent all her weekends working part-time jobs just to buy you a gift. She delivered food, waited tables. She did everything she could. Did you ever know that? One time, while making deliveries, she even got into an accident and fractured her left arm. To this day, her left hand never fully recovered. And yet, she used the money she saved for 6 months to order a custom-made suit for you. You didn't even hesitate to throw it away after Clara said the color was ugly. Do you realize what you discarded that day? It wasn't just a suit. You threw away half a year of her hard work, her effort, and her love. There's nothing left for me to argue about anymore. In my previous life, because I was too weak, I didn't confess my love to her at the wedding, and I didn't take her away from you. My hesitation cost her life. She died in agony because I didn't protect her. In this life, I swore I would keep her safe. So when I realized I'd been reborn on our wedding day, I immediately asked my parents to make all the arrangements. I was determined to marry Lisa. I was determined to give her happiness. Since you ignored her, I refused to stand by and watch her suffer again. That's the whole truth you wanted to know. When Daniel Reed heard everything, his face went pale. It was only then that he truly understood. He had been the one who ruined my life, while Michael Lewis had been the one who truly loved and protected me all along. Countless emotions washed over Daniel: regret, shame, resentment, and grief. Only at that moment did he finally understand what love truly meant. After everything was said, he and Michael shook hands. They had both long since outgrown their youthful pride. I had been standing outside the door the whole time, listening to their conversation from beginning to end. Only then did I realize how much Michael had done for me, how deeply he had loved me, and that he too had been reborn. That was why, on our wedding day, his confession had sounded so genuine, so full of emotion. By the time I processed it all, tears were streaming down my face. I turned and quietly walked away from the hospital room. There was no need to tell him I had heard everything. Some truths are best kept in the heart. I already had Michael's love. That alone was enough to fill the rest of my life. That night, when Michael came home, I was already asleep. He slipped into bed beside me, wrapped his arms around me, gently stroked my cheek, and whispered, "I'm just glad that in this life I had the courage, for both you and me. That's why we didn't miss our chance." After that, Michael and I devoted ourselves completely to our country's scientific research programs. Together, we achieved breakthrough after breakthrough. Our discoveries pushed technology forward, one milestone at a time. Eventually, from overwork and exhaustion, Michael fell ill. At 57, he passed away, leaving me behind. I didn't choose to follow him in death, because I knew my life still had meaning. I carried his love with me, continuing our work, dedicating every remaining day of my life to the nation and fulfilling the dream he never got to complete. I was grateful that fate had given me a second chance, to experience love again, to live fully, and to give my life the greatest purpose it could have.